So, shall we wait for him to come back, or should we begin now?
You're leaving it to me. Good. Let's begin.
The faces are for no one. You are still someone. And to someone, the faces are as good as poison.
Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Game of Thrones Season 5, Episode 10, Mother's Mercy. So now's the time. I usually say this is a spoiler-free video, free of book spoilers, but for the most part, this episode has now caught up the show to the books. In fact, many storylines ended exactly where they ended in the last published book, particularly Jon Snow's, Cersei's, Daenerys's, and kind of Winterfell's storyline, although that's been altered from the book, so it's hard to say for sure. There's one storyline that's still slightly behind and still has a little bit material left in the published books, which is Arya's. Also, Sam's storyline could also be said to be behind, but that's probably going to be seriously altered as well. And then there's a storyline that's actually ahead of where the books left off, and that's Stannis. And several other storylines that have been so altered from the books it's impossible to play, such as Dorne, Tyrion's, Varys's, and Brienne's. However, there's still some characters who have yet to appear in the show that already appeared in the books that still may yet appear in the show later on, so that and the little we know about Sam and Arya's storyline could still be spoiled in some way to people who haven't read the books, so I will be holding back a little bit in this review, so if you haven't read the books you'll be safe from that. But for the most part, at the start of Season 6, book readers and non-book readers will be on even footing, unless the 6th book gets put out before Season 6 begins, which apparently George R. R. Martin is aiming to do, but whether or not he'll be successful is another story. At any rate, to avoid spoilers, you should have seen up to Episode 10 of Season 5 before watching this video. So, I usually don't do this and save it for last. I decided to start the review for this episode with my overall feelings on the episode. And I'll say the same thing about this episode that I said about the Better Call Saul season finale. And that is my expectations were too high for this episode and thus hindered my enjoyment of them. I'm sure I'll come to appreciate this episode more in time, but my initial reaction was to be disappointed. Those familiar with my channel know that I'm no book purist, far from it. Many know me as someone who is quick to point out when the show does something better than the books, and the last one to complain about a change from the books. However, in this case, I'm afraid I'm going to have to say that this episode failed to live up to my expectations based off of what occurred in the books, and I dare say the books were better. Sorry, but I just have to this time. All storylines were a disappointment to me, all save one, which was Arya's storyline. Not only was that not a disappointment, but I'd go as far to say it far exceeded the book material, but I'll get more into that later. And it wasn't just the books I found this episode disappointing. It's also the standard that last year's season finale, the children's set, which was one of my all-time favorite episodes, which proved a season finale of Game of Thrones could be spectacular. And based off of interviews from many of the actors boasting that this would be the best episode of Game of Thrones ever, or that it would blow the Red Wedding out of the water, I was expecting a lot more than what we got. That's not to say this episode was bad, just that I was a victim of my own expectations, but I'll get more into that later. So let's start off where we begin with Stannis Baratheon. So Melisandre sees that it stops snowing and the weather's all better and she thinks everything's looking up, but then Stannis' general tells him half his army has deserted because he roasted his own freaking daughter alive. And then they find out that Selyse, his wife, hung herself, and so then Melisandre looks at Stannis and is like, "Screw you guys, I'm a-going home." Or at least back to Castle Black, as we later learn. So there's no doubt in my mind that Melisandre at this point knew that Stannis was fucked. She knew if she stayed with him, she'd be staying with a sinking ship. So she's like, fuck this shit, I'm out of here. And I wouldn't doubt it if she was questioning her entire belief that Stannis was Azor Ahai, the Lord of Light's chosen. But because she figured sacrificing Shireen would, for the great Lord's chosen would be a great victory, and it seems to do the opposite. I mean, you think Melisandre would be like, oh shit, maybe I was wrong all along. But let's be honest here, Melisandre isn't the type of person to admit she's wrong. She's the type of stubborn-ass person to put the blame on someone else rather than herself. I think she's putting the blame on Stannis and is thinking it means he's not really the Lord's chosen, so she decides to get the fuck out of Dodge. Whereas Selyse, this was interesting. I did not see this coming. Someone even asked me last week what I think would happen to Selyse, and suicide wasn't an immediate contender in my mind. I mean, I thought maybe in time she might commit suicide, but it didn't even occur to me that she'd do it right away. But apparently I was wrong, because she did. So then we go to the wall where Jon and Sam are having a heart-to-heart, and Sam asks Jon to go to Old Town so he can become a maester, and he asks if Gilly and her baby can come with him. Jon begrudgingly grants his request. So I don't tend to do this, but I'm going to compare this to what happened in the books, because in the books Sam leaves for Old Town a lot earlier, like chronologically towards the beginning of the season. In fact, in the books, Maester Aemon goes with him and dies on the way. Also, going to Old Town in the books was Jon's idea, and Sam was against it, but they flipped it around here. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I understood why the show did it the way they did it, and I do think it makes perfect sense for the show. In fact, after I saw Sam and Gilly getting attacked by those dudes, I predicted that Sam would ask Alistair Thorne if he could go to Old Town, but apparently he waited until Jon got back and asked him, which too makes a lot more sense. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the changes. I think they make perfect sense. I was just noting the differences. So then we follow up on Chekhov's corkscrew. That is, several episodes ago, Sansa grabbed a corkscrew or something like that, and we finally get to see her use it as she uses it to escape her room. Then we check in on Podrick and Brienne is just standing there as normal, looking out for the candle. But then Podrick runs and tells her about Stannis' approaching army. So this is the thing that really, really frustrates me. I'm not saying it's bad writing or anything like that, but it's just such a typical storytelling device that pisses me off so much. Brienne stops looking for the candle moments before Sansa lights it. I mean, moments like these, you just want to give the show writers the big middle finger. In fact, I think I was screaming at the screen, and both middle fingers were pointed at it. Again, not that it's necessarily bad writing, but it's just like, oh, fuck you. Why are you doing that? So then Stannis starts to prepare for the siege, but his general is like, I don't think there's going to be a siege. And he sees a vast bolting army approaching, and then we see from Sansa's perspective as a big-ass bolting army, much bigger than Stannis', approaches his. And in another moment where I gave the screen the middle finger, they just skipped right over the battle and jumped straight into Stannis' being defeated. I mean, this is another thing where I just want to scream at the screen, fuck you. This may be another moment where I had higher expectations due to the books, although this battle has yet to occur in the books. Everyone is predicting it will be a huge deal, like a big battle, and they just skipped right over it. Now, because Stannis lost the battle and possibly his life, which I'll get into shortly, this could possibly mean this happens in the book as well, or maybe not. Maybe something entirely different happens in the books. Thankfully, David Benioff didn't give this away in the Inside the Episode feature this time. Thanks for keeping your mouth shut this time, goofball. And I say that in good fun, of course. Anyway, Brienne comes across Stannis, who's already badly hurt, and says she's there to execute him for using black magic to kill Renly, which he doesn't deny. And in fact, he's like, just get on with it. So Brienne gets out her sword, swings it, and then it jumps to a match cut of Ramsay swinging his sword. Again, I gave the screen the middle finger. Now everyone's going to be debating and wondering whether or not Stannis is actually dead because they just did a fucking jump cut. Urgh! I mean, you guys can't help but piss me off in this episode. As I said, Stannis' storyline is ahead of the book, so what I'm about to say should not be seen in any way, shape, or form as a spoiler because it is a complete and utter speculation based solely off of what we saw in this episode. But I think Stannis is dead. I don't think there's any way Brienne would not kill him. I don't think Stannis even wants to live anymore. His daughter's dead. His wife is dead. His army's either deserted or defeated. Melisandre abandoned him. He's done. And as I said, there's no reason Brienne wouldn't kill him. I know people are going to be debating this because they could, did this stupid bullshit match cut. But I think that I am correct and Stannis is dead. But you should fucking show that shit. This is a major fucking player and he's dead. We need to fucking see him die. Fuck, this show is really pissing me off. I often brought up in the past how Gwendolyn Christie said in an interview that Season 5 was her favorite season and the best season for Brienne, and because of that, I was actually expecting her to do something in this episode because she's done sweet fuck all season except for just sit there and stare at a tower waiting for a candle to be lit, and when it is lit, she's not even fucking there to see it. So all she does is kill Stannis, and they don't even have the decency to make it clear that she did kill Stannis. Instead, they kind of leave it open-ended. It's beyond me how, in anyone's mind, this could be the best season for Brienne. So I was utterly disappointed in her storyline this season. So then we go back to Winterfell, where Sansa is still running around until she runs into Ramsay's crazy girlfriend Miranda, who's pointing an arrow at her, and Sansa's like, yeah, fuck it, just, go ahead and kill me. But, she's like, no, I'm not going to kill you, but I'm going to hurt you. And she pulls back like she's about to shoot her. And then Reek, who I can now comfortably call Theon, goes all Darth Vader on her and throws her off the balcony like the Emperor. Then they jump off the wall, the castle wall, never to be seen in this episode again. Okay, so I found this scene wildly disappointing, and I'm now ready to declare Sansa's entire Season 5 storyline a failure. I know many had already done this after Episode 6, but I was holding out to see where they went with it, and what they did wasn't great. It was alright, but I don't think it's enough to justify what they did to her. In interviews, everyone was going on about how strong Sansa was and how Season 5 would portray her as a full-on player of the Game of Thrones. But that's not what I saw this season. I was expecting to see that, but instead, Theon, a man, saves her like she was some damsel in distress. The fuck is up with that shit? I realize this is how it happened in the books, but Theon saved Jane Poole, who was a helpless character. Sansa is supposed to be the strong character, so in that case, I expected her outcome to be different than Jane Poole's, but it's not. So how is she a strong character? Also, speaking of Theon, he's turned from the dark side happened a bit too freaking easily. I mean, it was only seconds ago he was whining and being all like, oh, do what she says. And then all of a sudden he totally changes from a coward to a brave savior willing to jump off a castle wall. I'm sorry, but I'm not buying this. Again, I might have been influenced by the books in which his turn was much more explained, much more believable. But here, I'm going to call bullshit and say this adaptation was very poorly handled. So I think Sansa and Theon's whole Season 5 storyline was a failure. So next we go to Braavos, and as I alluded to earlier, my favorite scenes of the episode, and possibly one of my favorite scenes of the entire series, where they further sledgehammer the point home on how despicable a man Meryn Trant is. To not only show him sleep with little girls, but beat them as well. So he has 3 of them lined up and he starts beating them, but one of them doesn't scream out and seems to take the pain. This, of course, doesn't please Meryn, so he kicks the other 2 out and focuses on the one. Now, this girl's face was being obscured by her hair, so I assumed it would be Arya, but when you see her face, you see it isn't Arya, so you think, oh, it's not Arya, but in fact, it is Arya, as she's just wearing a different face. She then fucking stabs Meryn, then stabs both his freaking eyes, and taunts him, and is like, do you know who I am? I'm Arya Stark, motherfucker, and you killed my teacher. This is some serious Quentin Tarantino shit right here. It was so gruesome and fucked up, and it was awesome. I might even put this above her killing Pulliver in season 4, which was another one of my favorite scenes, but this was just so fucking awesome. I half expected him to say that he didn't kill Serial Pharrell and that he's still alive, like many of us speculate he is, but alas, he didn't, and instead Arya just slits his throat. So this next scene is another really badass scene, and very well maybe my favorite scene of the entire series, behind last week's Drogon attack. Arya comes back to return the face where Jaqen and the waif confront her and saying the masks are for no one and she clearly is someone. And because she stole a life from the Red God, he had to give one back. So the waif grabs her and you think he's going to poison her. Instead, he drinks the poison himself. So Arya screams and cries over his dead body, but then, they take a face off of the waif. She takes her face off and reveals it's really Jaqen Hagar. So Arya starts freaking out and keeps removing faces off the dead body until she sees her own face, and then she starts screaming as she's going blind. This was just so freaking awesome. Such a creepy freaking scene. Far better than how it played out in the books. I was just like, oh my fucking god. Now I know some people are going to bitch about how the waif could just change into Jaqen, as Jaqen is taller than her, and people will complain it should be a simple matter of wearing a mask, and wearing a mask shouldn't change your body type. But I say, even if this is different than the books, where the faceless men weren't shown to display magical powers, I think the show was clearly indicating that in this universe of the show, the faceless men do have magical powers, and that was being employed, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And this also implies that the man we've been seeing as Jaqen Hagar isn't actually the same guy she encountered in season 2. I've just been calling him Jaqen Hagar for clarification. I know some people in other reviews refer to him as the man or whatever, but I'll just call him Jaqen because that's who he looks like. But it could simply be someone else wearing his face, as everyone there seems to be a generic no one, but we'll see. Or maybe we won't. Maybe it doesn't matter and it will never be explained, and I'd be fine with that too. And as I said, this Arya going blind thing isn't the end of her book storyline. In fact, it happened at the end of book 4. Although she doesn't appear all that much in book 5, she does have 1 or 2 chapters, plus a sample chapter from book 6, which was released online a while ago. So this is one of the few things left book readers have to keep their lips sealed about, although what happens in the show may prove to be extremely different to what happened in the books. Okay. Oh, God. So I guess because we have to, we'll go to Dorne, where, they all say teary farewell to Jaime, Myrcella, Trystane, and Bronn as they get on the boat to leave, and Alaria Sand is there to give Myrcella a kiss, which turns out to be Chekhov's kiss, but I'll get into that later. So then they get on the boat to leave, and Jaime starts having a heart-to-heart with Myrcella, and it's obvious he's about to tell her she's really her dad, and the whole time I'm like, no, don't do that. But on the other hand, it made Alaria's little heart-to-heart with Jaime last week make much more sense. When she was like, oh, it's no big deal, you're in love with your sister, who cares? I think she was purposely doing that to trick him into opening up to her, which would surely be a disaster. But miraculously, it isn't a disaster, and Myrcella said she knew all along that she's happy to have him as a father, and gives him a nice big lovey-dovey hug. Now, Back in episode 4, where Stannis had this big heart-to-heart with Shireen and told her how much he loved her, alarm bells were going off for me because whenever two people are being all lovey-dovey, that's usually signified as something really bad is about to happen. And I compared that to how Robb Stark and his wife Talisa were all lovey-dovey right before the Red Wedding when they both got frickin' stabbed. So seeing this scene, the impossible connection between Marcella and Jaime, I heard those same alarm bells going off, and this time I didn't have to wait very long for the payoff because she then immediately dies, apparently poisoned by Illyria's kiss. Also, I'll note that the poison that's revealed is to be the same sort of long-lasting poison that Tyene gave Bronn several episodes ago. So a lot of people were wondering, well, that scene doesn't make any sense. Why would Tyene poison Bronn just to cure him in the next episode? But apparently it was set up for this, so to get the audience aware of the poison. So, one of the things that pissed me off so much about these scenes is that we didn't get any follow-up to it in this episode. I had expected Jaime to turn around or go back to Dorne, but then again, I guess, he doesn't run the ship. But maybe Trystane might even turn the ship around because he'd be pretty pissed off because he's not going to be happy about this. Or maybe Bronn and Jaime would make a move against Trystane and take him as a hostage as retribution. I mean, seriously, Illyria has put his life in danger by doing that, and how the fuck could Illyria do that, and expect to live after Doran made her swear allegiance? Does she really think he won't be able to figure out who was the one that poisoned her? And plus, it seems like having Marcella and Trystane sent to King's Landing was part of Doran's plan. Maybe not, all along, but at least since the events of last week's episode, it seems that he wanted to plant Trystane in King's Landing, and Illyria probably just fucked up his plan. You think he's going to be happy about that? So, I've been the biggest defender of Dorne this whole time. People have been, ragging on it and the Sand Snakes and saying how the whole storyline was comically bad. And I've had this, it's not as bad as people say it is, but that's it. I'm done defending it. I was expecting some big payoff of Dorne in this episode, and I certainly don't consider this it. To say that the whole Season 5 Dorne storyline pales in comparison to the book storyline is a vast understatement. And bear in mind, the Dorne storyline in the books wasn't a very popular one, but this was much worse. So I am ready to declare, as I'm sure many others will be as well, that the Season 5 Dorne storyline a complete and utter failure. That being said, I still think it could yet be salvaged in Season 6, but as far as Season 5 goes, it failed miserably. So then we go to Meereen, where we see Daario, Tyrion, and Jorah all bickering at each other like a bunch of little bitches. And then Missandei and Grey Worm come in, and then Daario takes charge and declares that he and Jorah will go off looking for Dany, and Grey Worm and Missandei will be the temporary king and queen of Meereen, as Tyrion will be there to advise them and basically be the brains behind the operation. First of all, who the hell is Daario? Who the hell put Daario in charge? And secondly, how come he and Jorah are the only two people going off to look for Daenerys? When he said they were going off together, I had assumed they would be taking like a bunch of other people with them. Where the hell is Second Sons? Why doesn't Daario take some of them with him? So earlier I made a prediction video where I predicted Daenerys would leave to Westeros by the end of this season, and it turns out I was wrong. And before anyone gets in their minds to gloat, I was pretty clear it was a bold prediction, meaning I didn't expect I didn't expect it to actually happen. But if it had happened, I would have the rights to brag like there was no tomorrow. But really, I only gave the theory like a 20% chance of happening. And some may think that's too high, and considering how wrong I was, it would be hard to argue with that. So go ahead and gloat if you want. I humbly admit defeat, but know that I wasn't all that invested in this anyway. At any rate, I'm going to make another bold prediction for Season 6, and I can comfortably make this prediction here since it has nothing to do with the books and is based entirely off of what I've seen in the show alone and no other sources. And that is that Grey Worm and Missandei being King and Queen of Meereen will be a permanent arrangement. I predict with Tyrion's help, they will solve the Harpy problem before Dany returns, and when she does, she'll leave straight for Westeros, leaving Grey Worm and Missandei in charge of Meereen. Although Tyrion will go with her, they would have learned a lot from Tyrion in that time and be ready to roll. I mean, I was kind of leaning in this direction before this episode, so now even more so. So this is another prediction you can gloat over once I get wrong. So then we see Varys as his slow ass finally show up in Meereen, and he had a nice little heart-to-heart with Tyrion. This scene was okay, I guess, but it's mostly just set up for the next season, as Varys pretty much says he'll be Tyrion's spy master. And to go along with the theory I just gave, I think he's going to help Tyrion solve the Sons of the Harpy problem with his spying. At any rate, this is another thing that disappointed me. This scene was great and all, but I was really expecting Varys to turn up elsewhere as he did in the books, and I'm sure I'll get more into that in my discussion video with Apkin Tomko later on this week. But maybe Varys and Meereen will pay off in season 6, but I'll have to wait another year for that payoff, and I'm not too thrilled about that. Anyway, next scene, Daenerys is off with Drogon, who just wants to sleep. Doubtless, he's still recovering from his many spear wounds and requires it rest. So, Dany goes out in search of food and instead encounters a huge-ass Dothraki Khalasar, which isn't that good of a sign. Not much to say about this scene. It happens pretty much the way it did in the books. I'm not too happy that the season ended with such a cliffhanger, but hey, it ended in the books with the same cliffhanger as well. Although this is a prediction I got right, as the synopsis for the episode read, Dany is surrounded by strangers, and I insisted that the strangers were the Dothraki, even though a number of people argued with me and said it wouldn't be, said that it would most likely be the Stonemen or something else like that. But this is something I was incredibly sure of, and it turns out I was right, but it's not that great of a guess considering that this is what happened in the books, and I was just going off of that. So then we go to King's Landing, where Cersei is begging for forgiveness. Of course, she doesn't mean it. She's just saying that in order to get the hell out of jail. She admits to sleeping with Lancel, but not that the father of her children is really Jaime rather than Robert. Because if she admits that, then Tommen has no claim to the throne and he'd lose all his power. Personally, I think she'd rather die than have that happen. But it's funny how the High Sparrow didn't even ask her about whether or not she plotted to have Robert killed, because that was one of the charges against her, but he didn't even check in, which I thought was a bit weird. So then the High Sparrow agrees to let her go home, but he makes her do this long, arduous walk naked while the Septas yell shame and people throw shit at her. This scene was all well and good, but to my liking, it went on for far too long. I mean, really, did we need to spend 3 minutes watching Cersei get bathed? And the walk itself seemed to go on forever. I mean, maybe this is just me being impatient because I wanted more follow-up on some of the other storylines, like Sansa or Dorne or Brienne or Tyrion. Also, it would have been nice to at least touch in with what was going on with Marjorie and Loras, or perhaps even see Tommen doing something other than moping in his room. So maybe I'm being a bit unfair, but to me, they really got the point across well enough without having to spend so freaking long on it. And plus, there's a certain King's Landing scene from the books I was really hoping to see that we didn't, but I'll talk more about that in a discussion video with Apkin Tomko as well. So, Cersei finishes her walk and is greeted by her Uncle Kevin, Grand Maester Pycelle, and Qyburn. Pycelle seems to be quite pleased at seeing Cersei in this state, and I can't really blame him considering how big of a bitch she's been to him these past couple of seasons. Every chance she gets, she treats him like shit, so I could see why seeing her like this might please him. Anyway, Qyburn is the only one comforting her, and he throws a blanket over her and then introduced her to the newest member of the King's Guard. So it's not at all a spoiler for me to say this, because this scene happens pretty much the exact same way in the books as it did here. So book readers, per se don't know any more about this than non-book readers, but come the fuck on. The guy is clearly Franken Mountain. I mean, there should be no doubt. There's this huge man who Qyburn introduces that never speaks. Anyone, is insane if they think it's not the frickin' mountain. In the books, he's referred to as Robert Strong, and even people who've read the books refer to the thought that Robert Strong is really the mountain is a theory. But I've always been against this. It's not a freaking theory. It's freaking obvious. It's a goddamn mountain. No way that it's not. The show makes this even more clear with the scene we got in last year's finale when Qyburn is promising to keep him alive and Cersei asks if it will make him weaker, and he's like, oh no. So quit fooling yourselves. It's the goddamn mountain. End of discussion. However, in the books, there's a very specific reason why this man is a member of the King's Guard, which isn't explained in the show, and I won't get into that as it may be explained next season. So then we go to the Wall where we see Davos begging Jon Snow for more men. Little does he know, Stannis is already defeated and probably dead. Jon Snow refuses, and then Melisandre returns, and when Davos asks about Stannis, she gives him a look that I think he knows to mean he's done for. And then Davos asks about Shireen, and Melisandre gives another negatory look, so I think then he knows that she's no more as well. I don't, however, think that Davos knows it was Melisandre who burned her at the stake and ended up dooming Stannis. Had he known that, I'm sure he would have strangled her to death right then and there, which is probably why she didn't tell him. So it's interesting. Stannis is probably dead and his army is defeated, but Davos lives. So it leaves an open-ended question of what Davos may get up to next season. Who will he follow? What will he do? These will be interesting things to ponder over the long break. So then we see Jon sitting down, looking upset, reading some letters. Some book readers may be theorizing that what he's reading is a particular letter that he received in the books. I'm going to say it's possible, but I think most likely it's not the case, that it's just a harmless letter. So then Ollie comes in looking all excited and tells Jon that a wildling knows where his missing uncle Benjen is. So Jon runs out and Sir Alistair leads him to where he is, but in fact there is no man there just across that reads traitor. Alistair then stabs Jon and says, for the watch, and then the Night's Watchmen all take turns stabbing him, saying for the watch until Ollie, his trusted squire, deals the final blow and says for the watch. Now, first of all, I think it makes sense that they said mention the Benjen in order to draw Jon Snow out, because Benjen's been missing like forever, so they knew that the thought of they might actually know where he is would excite Jon Snow and that he would run out without thinking, which is what they wanted. They wanted him to not be really prepared. So I gotta say, I'm absolutely certain that I would have enjoyed this scene a hell of a lot more had I not read the books. This is one scene I felt was ruined by the books, which isn't a normal thing. For example, last week's scene with Dany going for a ride on Drogon, that was in the books, so I knew it was coming, but I wasn't disappointed at all. If anything, I thought it was even better than the books. And then there's the Red Wedding. Although I hadn't read the books when that episode first aired, when I did eventually read the books, I felt the Red Wedding was actually portrayed better in the show than it was in the books. Whereas this scene, I think, was a disappointment and did not play out as well as it did in the books. Like, I think this scene would be fine, perhaps even great if I hadn't read the books, but because I had, it wasn't all that good. And because of that, I see it as a failure. And I think there are several reasons for this. First off, the reasons on why they killed him weren't nearly as strong or as well explained as they were in the book. Secondly, it was foreshadowed way too heavily. I said in my spoilery discussion with Apkin Tomko last week, could they possibly be more obvious with the foreshadowing? I mean, particularly with Ollie. I mean, even people who hadn't read the books thought they were being way too heavy-handed with Ollie. So by the time that Ollie comes out and stabs him, I don't think anyone is the least bit surprised. If you could see me now, you'd see the very plain expression on my face, and that would show how surprised I was that Ollie got stabbed, or that Ollie stabbed Jon. And I'm certain even people who haven't read the books had the same reaction. I mean, personally, I think the Ollie thing could have played out so much better, even for me who knew it was coming, had they not so heavily foreshadowed it. This, if it really did seem to come out of nowhere, it would have been far more powerful. As it is, it seemed like the natural progression. Like, of course Ollie's gonna stab Jon, so it lost some of its power. So my rating for Mother's Mercy is a 9 excellent. Now, that may seem a bit high considering how much I've been ragging on this episode in this review, but bear in mind, as I said, my expectations of this episode were too high, and so I'm being much harder on it. Based on what it was in the books, what last year's finale was like, and what everyone was saying about it, I was expecting it to be a 10 easily, and perhaps one of the best episodes of the series, but clearly it was not. I mean, the last 2 episodes are easily in my top 5 episodes for the entire series, so that set the bar really high for this episode, which failed to live up to it. However, I do recognize that this is still a strong, powerful episode, despite my disappointment over the Brienne stuff, or the Jon Snow stuff, or the Cersei stuff. They're still really good, which I'm sure I'll come to appreciate more later. But what I won't get over is the Dorne resolution and the Sansa resolution, which I do see as failures, which definitely kept this episode from being a 10. However, the Stannis resolution was satisfying, and the Arya scenes alone earned this episode a 9 because those scenes were just freaking amazing. So before I bring this video to the close, I want to talk about the Q&A I'll be doing with Apkin Tomko. We actually won't be doing a Q&A for our discussion video, which will actually be on my channel this week. I know it's his turn to host, but he's going on vacation and asked if I could host this week, which I'm happy to do since it's winter in New Zealand and I got nothing better to do. So we decided not to do a Q&A for our discussion video this week, as we'd rather spend the whole time talking about this episode because there's going to be a lot to talk about. But we have decided we are going to do a full-length end-of-the-year Q&A discussion video next week. So a video just devoted just to the Q&A. So that means you have a whole week to get your questions in, and also means that I encourage you to ask questions, as we're hoping to get a lot of good questions so that it couldn't last a whole video. So please make sure to send in your questions by making a comment below and starting the comment with Q&A, so I know it's meant for the Q&A video. And I remind you all, such comments will not appear in the comment section, so if you want anything to appear in the comment section, make a separate comment for that. Then tune in next week on Atkin Tomko's channel, where we will do a full-length video devoted just to the Q&A. And also, before I go, I want to keep you updated on what to expect on Enchantment of Eternity in the coming month, as this is the end of Season 5, but not the end of my Season 5 coverage. In addition to the discussion videos with Apkin Tomko I've already talked about, I'll be doing my own overall review of Season 5, which will include my top 10 characters of the season and my top 10 episodes of the season. I'll also be doing a top 20 favorite moments of Season 5 and a top 10 least favorite moments of Season 5, similar to what I did last year. I'm also going to do a video for my 5 favorite seasons, so top 5 favorite seasons of Game of Thrones. Also, I'll be adding annotations to all of my Season 5 prediction videos. So I'll be adding annotations with the corrections of all the predictions I made, saying which ones I got right, which ones I got wrong, which ones I kind of got right, kind of got wrong. And I'll be doing up a tally. So I'll put, if you go to my channel page, I will, when I start doing this, I'll put a playlist on my channel page because I'm not making new videos, I'm just adding annotations to the prediction videos I already made. But once I've added the annotations, I'll put them in this playlist for the I guess prediction corrections, I'll call them, or prediction outcomes maybe. And so I'll be doing this over the next month or two, so that's another thing to look forward to. And I'll try to put this out every Monday, and by Monday I mean Monday in New Zealand, which may be Sunday for most people around the world depending on where you're living. And I'm going to try to put out my regular videos every Thursday and Sunday, and again that's New Zealand Thursday and Sunday. And for those of you who don't notice, my regular video rotation is my non-season 5 coverage. I rotate between a Star Trek video, a Game of Thrones video, and then 4 non-Star Trek or Game of Thrones videos. Sometimes I throw in more Star Trek videos if I get a request for an episode review, but that's typically my cycle. So be sure to check out my book to show comparisons for season 3 through 5, which will be appearing in that cycle. So make sure you subscribe to keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.